clear it's on this page number. Figure it out there.
I mean, it should be pretty obvious.
True.
Confessions there. That's in common here, 300. Oh, there. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll set it on.
I was gonna text it, but then I was asking too long.
Do you have a keyboard?
I just have like the numbers.
Okay.
Give a little plug in keyboards for texting.
Yeah.
There's been multiple thoughts I've had over the last 2 days that I wanted to text you, and I'm like, I'm just gonna leave. He's not happy.
Just call, we should just start calling. Yeah, just call me.
Yeah, that's also what I was gonna ask you, is if, are you okay if I call people?
Yeah.
Because I'm,
I might, if I'm like in class. But that's given.
Dude, if you're gonna satisfy me, you're hanging up too.
Yeah, it's like,
yeah, my screen doesn't turn on when I'm calling, so I can't hang up on people.
It's
So
like,
it really has to be you.
it's weird because it must be messing up because it's supposed to do that like when you look up to here and.
Yeah, mine does it the opposite way. If I hit buttons when it's on my face, and it's black when it's in my hand.
It just wants to spike you.
It really, everything, I don't wanna talk about it.
All right, so let me offer a quick summary, outline of what the general structure of the confessions looks like. Book one is roughly an account of creation, specifically the creation of Augustine. Book two is roughly an account of fallenness, specifically Augustine's fallenness. Books 3 through 8 are basically an account of the path to redemption. And then, of course, book 8 is redemption. And then book 9, which we read for today, is an account of blessedness. Again, specifically Augustine's blessedness. So this pattern, creation, fall, redemption, blessedness, this is a common Christian narrative pattern. The rest of the book, Augustine does something interesting. I would describe what happens in books 10 through 13. These are basically the philosophical conditions for narrative. So here we get an account of time. So you need sequence of events. You need an account of memory. You can't have a personal narrative without memory of your past and current states, and creation itself. So while books 10 through 13 often feel like they're really disconnected from the narrative, I mean, definitely there's a different sort of focus. It's no longer a biographical story. But one can make sense of why the topics that appear in books 10 through 13 appear there. So here in book 9, we're going to get all that we're going to get about Augustine's existence as a Christian. And then we're going to move on to these more metaphysical, philosophical topics. And I mean, even to this day, if you hang out in certain Christian circles, you will be encouraged to tell a narrative story of your own that vaguely follows this narrative. Maybe the creation part will leave out. You don't say, I was a baby once. We all kind of know that. But it's very common in certain, especially low, evangelical circles and such, to encourage people to tell a story about what they were like pre-Christian, what their path to redemption was, and the difference that it's made in their lives. That's telling your story, telling your testimony, your witness. I've heard it called several different things in several different Christian subcultures. Yes.
I just think it would be really funny. I guess like in my subculture, it's called like giving your testimony or whatever kind of thing. I just think it'd be really funny to be like Augustine and just be like, when I was a baby, I was so selfish and all this stuff. Like, go really into depth about the creation.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, you're all too young for this, but that's an old Bugs Bunny joke. Go back to the beginning. Well, I was born to a family, and or he'd say, "Oh, I don't really remember. I was pretty young back then." This literally an old Looney Tunes joke.
Maybe we'll do an episode about our testimonies, and I'll start off with the beginning of time. Our great ancestor was born.
Or we could do. I sometimes joke that I have 2 goals for my philosophical career. One is taken from G.W.F. Hegel, who writes a history of philosophy, showing how all the history of thought leads up to the thought of G.W. I often call him the most arrogant man in history. Sometimes I go a step farther and say he's the kind of guy that would accuse God of having a Hegel complex. The other goal for my career is from Augustine. Late in his career, he writes a book called The Retractions, where he reconsiders different claims that he's made in different books. And it turns out he doesn't take very much back. So, like Hegel, I want to write a history of philosophy that leads up to the thought of Eric J. Silverman. And like Augustine, I want to write a book saying, yeah, I don't take anything back. All right, book 9. Augustine, the new convert, baptized on an Easter Sunday. We get accounts of his friends, his son, his mom, his career. Did anyone catch any references to the fiance? I didn't see any. Yeah, fiance. I guess breaking that, cutting her loose is not all that important in Augustine. So doesn't merit a sentence.
So his whole struggle with like wanting to quit, but not feeling like it's socially acceptable for him to quit yet. So I'm really confused. Was it because like it was coming up on a holiday and he didn't want to seem like he was copping out early?
No, it's a little more substantial than that. I mean, they didn't have formal contracts back then, though, at least I don't think. But still, he basically feels like he'd be leaving them in a lurch and basically breaching contract. The same way, most professors who quit or retire voluntarily, most of us, leave over the summer or at least over the winter. Most of us just don't pick some random Wednesday in like October or March and just say, that's it, I'm done. See ya. I mean, yeah, technically it's a job like any other. You could do that, but you'd be kind of an ass. So he wants to sort of fulfill his current commitments, but he doesn't think highly of his career. At one point he says to teach, he actually uses a sentence, something like, he teaches from a throne of lives. Of all things, it actually reminds me of a line from Elf.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was thinking.
Let's see if I can find it, because I underlined it. Oh yeah, here it is. So it's at the end of chapter 2, one of the last sentences. I allowed myself to sit for even a single hour in that chair of lives. You sit on a throne of lives and smell of, what's he smell of? According to Elf. Cookies?
Something that was obviously cigarettes. But
Yeah.
The smell was. I also noticed something else that was related to that I can't find anymore. He said something along the lines of thanking God for making him not want to be a part of that job anymore, which brought me back to, earlier in the book when he was like, maybe Chase, but not yet. But he said a very similar thing about his job of like, I know rhetoric's bad, but I still like it, so let me keep doing it. And now he's like, thank you for making me not do it.
Well, and he never teaches rhetoric after that. But, the guy's articulate. It's not like he never used the tools after that. Yeah. And that actually ties into chapter 1. Chapter 1 has an interesting conversation on the nature of free will. And on which, he basically claims that he was not genuinely free prior to his conversion. The claim is, if freedom involves the real ability to do other than what we do, he says, well, I was enslaved to these things. I was enslaved to lust. I was enslaved to materialism. And now I don't have to choose that, and I'm free to choose something better.
Like you could say the same thing about grace. Like the lust is the devil on your shoulder making you choose that, and I would say that the grace is the angel on your shoulder making you do that.
Yeah, well, I guess the idea is once you have both, then you can actually choose.
Okay, because you still have the flesh and.
But again, it also depends on each person's experience. Yeah. So, any other thoughts?
There's this part where he's talking about Monica, and he says she was in a woman's garb but with a man's faith. Is that just like a way of explaining that she had really strong faith? Or is there like
That's how I.
Yeah, that's the way. Using the traditional preference for masculinity over femininity. So yeah, she is a woman, but at heart, she's in charge. She ran the family. She overcame the barriers around her. It's both complimentary and misogynistic at the same time. That's like telling someone, yeah, you almost don't seem like a girl at all. Don't say this to people today. You'll get in a lot of trouble.
So when Monica dies and Monica dies.
Spoiler alert.
And he's like has this weird inner conflict where using the pride. That was more like a societal thing at the time, or his own weird stoicism kind of thing.
There was definitely a stoic thread in Roman culture, but I attribute it more to Augustine's. Doesn't it sound like Augustine's personality, where he gushes about Monica, but he won't even cry over her. This is the all or nothing, black and white kind of bipolar response we get out of Augustine.
I think it also relates back to what Monica said before she died. She said to both of us, put this body away anywhere, don't care about it, disturb you. Because she knows that go to heaven and she's living eternally. And he's like, I shouldn't really care that she's not in this temporal world, but she's still alive forever.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of thing where it's a little weird. I mean, look, even if we just stipulate, sure, absolutely, she'll be in eternity. I'll get to hang out with her there. You can still mourn the absence. I mean, this is your mom, man, and you wrote an awful lot more about her than you did your dad. So it's not like they're not close. So it seems again dysfunctional, bipolar. It seems there's something emotionally not suitable. That reaction seems just wrong. But this is often, people like Augustine react that way. And there is a thread in scripture where, it basically speaks as if this world is so unimportant that if you're married, you should live as if you're not. If you mourn, you should, it should be brief and momentary. If you have joy, you should not get caught up in it. So there's definitely a Stoic feeling strand in Christianity, and there's no doubt that Augustine easily sort of leans that way, towards that overly passive, overly unattached to things of this world.
So he mentions, so did he have a brother? This is just like very briefly, like, oh, me and my brother.
Yeah, Augustine has two siblings that made it to adulthood. I can't remember any specific details about them. They don't, as you can tell, they didn't really play much role in the narrative. I mean, it's possible that they weren't close age-wise. If a couple marries when the woman is like 15, 16, your siblings can be up to 20 years apart from you. All right, so let's go through this sort of topic by topic. So we've got the discussion of free will in chapter 1, where he claims that he's finally free because now he can choose what he really wants to choose. I should put this on the board. There are at least two sort of visions of free will. There's sometimes what is called libertarian free will. And libertarian free will is about the real ability to do other than what you do. Then there's something called compatibilist free will. And there's different variations on compatibilist free will, but essentially, compatibilist free will is either you don't necessarily have to have the real ability to do other than you do, so long as either your choices emanate from yourself, or sometimes you get something like you're able to want what you want to want. Say that 3 times fast. And if you look at Augustine, you see a lot of discussion of stuff like this, where he speaks as if he has to want worldly success or sex or things like that, but he doesn't really want to want such things. He reproaches himself for some such things. So in that sense, he did not truly have free will. Under this other version of compatibilist free will, I mean, almost any choice you make counts as free will, so long as you're not like possessed, or so long as like somebody else doesn't like force your body into whatever it is that you end up doing. So free will is a complex topic. For the sake of something like the problem of evil, Augustine usually seems to mean something like compatibilist free will rather than libertarian free will. I'll also say libertarian free will is one of those debates that, in a certain sense, just in general, can be really frustrating, because the topic is ultimately irresolvable. Because no matter what's true about free will, you can only know what you actually did. And you can always say, well, I might have done something else. But how do you know that? You only know what you did, and you only did what you did. We can't really access another timeline to see if there's some other timeline where you did otherwise. So all claims about it are strictly abstract, theoretical, or outrightly ideological. So.
Which is probably why it comes down to what he said in the last book, of like, I feel like I have free will. Therefore, I really hope in God.
Well, and there's something to that. What's important from our point of view isn't whether or not we really could do otherwise. What's important is that we experience our choices as not alienated from us. So this is why addictions are such an awful thing, is because we experience our choices as alienated from ourselves. And which is why true addicts will do, things that would otherwise be very much against their characters, which is why if you know an addict, suddenly you often feel like you don't know them, because they start to do things because of the addiction that they would never have done. All right, so we have free will. We have the end to his career as a rhetorician. In your sight, I resolved not to make a boisterous break, but gently to withdraw the services of my tongue from the language marks. I love the way he uses these metaphors. Thus, youths who do not meditate on your law or on your peace, but on foolish lies and court quarrels, would no longer pry from my mouth weapons for their madness. Happily, very few days still remained before the vintage vacation. I resolved to endure them so that I might leave in correct fashion, and since I had now been ransomed by you, not to put myself up for sale again. Yeah, so again, here's a guy who's too pure to teach people how to speak cleverly and well. I mean, I understand the instinct. Every once in a while I meet a student, and at the end of the day I feel like, yeah, I've made this person a much more dangerous person by teaching them logic and arguments, because they seem inclined to use such tools in very either egoistic or destructive ways or self-destructive ways. But then, I kind of figure that's not on me, that's on them. In chapter 3, we've got some more conversion stories, more friends who are dying. I'm not sure what else to say about all this. We look at his discussion in chapter 4. Again, he just sort of waxes on about his friends and his salvation. In chapter 5, we have more about his resigning of his position as a professor of rhetoric, When the vintage vacation was ended, I sent word to the citizens of Milan that they should arrange for another seller of words for their students. This was both because I had chosen to serve you and because I was no longer equal to that profession by reason of difficulty in breathing and the pain in my chest. I don't really know what to make of that. I'm not inclined to take that literally, but
But he says another point, doesn't he? He's like, I'm sick with some sort of like chest element or something.
I mean, maybe he's got like a serious flu or pneumonia at this point. But, you know, he can come back in 6 months. I mean, it's not like he never spoke or wrote or worked hard as a bishop. I mean, you know, Mr. 100 books. By letters I made known to your Bishop Ambrose, that holy man, both my former errors and my present intention, so that he could advise me as to which of your books it would be best for me to read, to the end that I would become more prepared and better fitted to receive so great a grace. He recommended the prophet Isaiah. I believe it was because he is more manifest prophet of the gospel and of the calling of the Gentiles than are the other writers. But in fact, I did not understand the first lesson in the book. Yeah, just start reading Isaiah. New convert. Yeah, just start reading Isaiah. That'll go well for you. But in fact, I did not understand the first lesson in this book. And thinking the whole work to be similar, I put it aside to be taken up again when I was better accustomed to the Lord's mode of speech. Yeah. Thanks, Ambrose. I always thought you were supposed to start people with one of the Gospels. I mean, I suppose Ambrose's idea is there's some interesting prophetic toned sections of Isaiah. But, you know, it's like 10% of the book. You got to wait for an awful lot of stuff to get to stuff like Isaiah 53. All right, chapter 6, we get Augustine's baptism. Alypius, of course, wants to be baptized alongside Augustine. That's something. Yes.
So Ernest's son, would he have been basically just like raised by Monica almost, it seems like?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, obviously he was raised by his mother until his mother left for Africa like 2 years ago, and was left with Augustine. It's ambiguous what happened. I mean, you know, it's a disturbing thought, but you know, historically people have had much less supervision and education than they do today. I mean, at this point, he's probably a young teenager. So yeah, I'm not completely sure.
Stealing some pears.
Maybe stealing some pears, maybe being raised by Monica. I mean, you know, Augustine's not a poor person. He's probably paying for him to get some training of his own. But yeah, it's not real clear. But yeah, here he is. He's 15. We also joined Alypius and Augustine. Also joined to ourselves the boy Adeodatus, beloved of God, born of me in the flesh out of my sin. Well, had you made him, he was almost 15 years old, and in power of mind, he surpassed many brave and learned men. Yeah, I mean, you know, Augustine's a smart guy. You know, I'm sure his son had a high IQ, and he was probably educated. O Lord, my God, creator of all things, most powerful to reform our deformities, to you do I confess your gifts. For in that boy I owned nothing but the sin, that he was brought up by us in your discipline, to that you and none other inspired us. Your gifts I confess to you. There's one of our books which is entitled On the Teacher, and in it he speaks with me. You know that his are all the ideas which are inserted there, as from the person of the one talking with me, when he was in his 16th year. I had the experience of many more wonderful things in him. To me, the power of a mind was a source of awe. Who except you is the worker of such marvels? Quickly you took his life away from the earth, and now I remember him with a more peaceful mind, for I have no fear for anything in his childhood or youth, and none at all for him as a man. We joined him to us of equal age in your grace, to be instructed in your discipline. We were baptized, and anxiety over our past life fled away from us. In those days I could not take my fill of meditating with wondrous sweetness on the depths of your counsel concerning the salvation of mankind. How greatly did I weep during hymns and canticles, keenly affected by the voices of your sweet singing church. So yeah, there you have it. Everybody's dying around Augustine again.
But if it was just physically dying, I wasn't from like not having, living up perfect thing. He's actually like dead.
Yeah, as far as I can tell. Let's see, we have some, chapter 7 is not a whole lot of use. Chapter 7 is literally about politics. It's about the ongoing posturing between the Orthodox Church and the Arian Church, and Valentinian the Arian, who was opposing Ambrose and Augustine and those associated with Ambrose.
So was it like really that widespread? It always seemed more like French when it was just like powerful people were into it.
You know, it's hard to know for sure because it's not like we have surveys or censuses. I mean, there's a story one can tell historically where maybe the Arians, had things gone just a little bit differently, maybe the Arians could have won one of the early councils. I mean, you know, instead of, you know, having Christ be of like substance instead of same substance. I don't really know. That's a question for Australia if you ever get the chance. All right, Monica. So now he gives sort of a tribute to Monica in sort of chapters 8 and 9. He gives Monica's story, talks a little bit about her faults, her tendency towards a little too much wine, the challenges of her marriage, where she was married not completely voluntarily to a non-Christian, and therefore lived with this non-Christian with a bad temper who cheats on her, and in her mother-in-law's house, who was somewhat harsh with her. But Augustine's tribute is that in the end, Monica wins them both over. You know, you can tell the story in a certain way where Monica is just pulling the strings on everyone. I mean, she gets Augustine to convert, she converts her husband, she converts her mother-in-law. I mean, you know, is she really meek, or is she like the Queen of Thorns from Game of Thrones? But I mean, he certainly makes her sound meek.
What he says, it seems like she also is kind of like big in the community, or like a big mediator, or like somebody people go to with like her advice.
Yeah, she's definitely, you know, involved. She's definitely someone people respect and trust and go to for advice. Yeah, pillar of the community type. Let's see, what else? There's a story that people were surprised. Patricius had such a bad temper, people assumed that he beat her, although he doesn't actually. You know, he's just a loud blowhard. There's a story about household gossip where some of the servants tried to curry favor with the mother-in-law by telling negative stories about Monica. But in the end, Monica's character shines through, and the mother-in-law turns against anyone that brings her negative tales, true or false, about Monica. So all that to say, you know, Monica, like a lot of people in history, probably had a pretty hard life. I mean, a simple life in a sense, but a difficult life. I mean, you know, married to someone who we wouldn't describe this as a loving relationship from our standards, or if there is, it's certainly a fairly dysfunctional one. Then there's an interesting thing in chapter 10. We have a joint vision. One of the very few in history. Most visions are very much a solitary experience. But chapter 10 stands out as one of the very few accounts of a miraculous vision where it's multiple people experiencing the divine vision. Chapter 11 is the death of Saint Monica, 11 and 12. I mean, essentially, Monica says, well, the things that I've hoped for have happened. I guess I can die now. I mean, again, it's almost so weird to think of, okay, your 35-year-old son has done what you wanted. I mean, I wonder if Augustine made the inference. I mean, he had to have been smart enough to realize if Monica kind of lets go a little bit because she has nothing to look forward to, nothing to hope for, it kind of makes me wonder if Augustine had married and had a few grandchildren for her, if she might have lived longer. I mean, this is a real thing, by the way. If people retire young, some people don't do well, and disproportionately they die young too. So there's a lot of people who take early retirement at 55 or 60, 62, young enough that they should live another 10 or 20 years. They go play golf for like 6 months, get bored with that, start sitting at home watching TV for 6 months, a year or two, start getting morbidly obese, and just kind of give up and stop caring. So having things that you desire, that you want, that you're willing to pursue is always good for us.
My great grandmother, she was right back for about 20 years. She had like a bunch. She's like, I'm ready to go.
Well, then, I don't know what to say about that. May you inherit her long-standing genes. That's the thing to say about that. Wow. To live to be 101. Can you imagine being born in 1920 and living to today and just seeing how the world has changed? I mean, we managed to add decades onto the end of life with our medicines. It's really very impressive on the one hand, but psychologically, it's got to be really hard to be, again, someone who grew up in the 20s and 30s, alive in the 21st century.
She definitely still had that mindset. Like, she was very old school, little Polish kind of lady. She really had sex and turned some potatoes in the basement, like stuff like that.
Well, that's right. I mean, that's what happens. People develop their core habits certainly by the time they're 30, probably by the time they're 20 or so. And and then to be alive 50, 60, 70 years later, 100 years later, it's you see a lot. All right, so Monica's buried. Augustine mourns her, refers to her as God's handmaiden a lot. Now, Lord, I confess to you in writing. Let him read it who wants to, let him interpret it if he wants. If he finds a sin in it, that I wept for my mother for a small part of an hour, for that mother now dead to my eyes, who for so many years had wept for me, so that I might live in your eyes. Let him not laugh me to scorn, but rather, if he is a man of large charity, let him weep over my sins before you, the Father of all brothers, as in Christ. Yeah, I mean, it's probably unmanly. He probably considers it well, here's the thing. It's not that he hasn't admitted to crying and weeping in other situations. I mean, I don't know. Maybe there were mourning customs that I'm not aware of. It's.
I wonder if he felt bad because like he knew that Monica was like a good woman, so he knew that ultimately she would end up and be like maybe felt weird about crying even though she's in their place.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing too. Often the people who are most upset at someone's death are those that have unresolved stuff. And Augustine maybe feels like he shouldn't be affected because everything's resolved. He's on good terms with her. They're both in the faith. He's had a shared divine vision with her. I mean, it doesn't get much more intimate than that. So, but there's definitely a Greco-Roman Stoic strand that you see in places. You also see it in Plato's Phaedo, where Plato writes negatively about those of Socrates' friends that get upset at his impending death.
Another thing that I noticed, he was talking about how he's trying to get over being sad. He was talking about going to the baths. Wasn't that one of Aquinas's remedies for sorrow? Just go to the bath and then after,
Sure. Well, I mean, look, there's not a lot of creature comforts. A hot shower even today is a great thing. If you live in the ancient world, yeah, nice, physically distracting bath is a thing that you can do, and it can be practical, it can be a clean one. On the other hand, I think as a Platonist, Augustine shouldn't be too comfortable with that, but I guess even the Platonists want them clean. Chapter 13, we have one more remembrance of Monica. Yeah, not sure what else to say. I mean, Saint Monica to this day, in Catholic circles, is still kind of a big deal. Many places and cathedrals are named after her.
She's the patron saint.
No, but it'll take me 20 seconds to find out.
Favorite one though is definitely Saint Lawrence. He's the patron saint of cooks. When he was on his grow alive.
Oh, look at this. Saint Monica is patron saint of mothers and wives.
Wow.
Yeah, she's got kind of a big scope there.
Yeah.
But you can kind of see. I mean, if you want, if you want to give hope to a mother who says, "I'm worried about how my Johnny's turning out," point that mother towards Saint Monica and say, "Well, look, she had to wait till she was 30, shacked up with this, concubine, had an illegitimate child, joined a religious cult." I mean, you can certainly tell a story to someone that would be comforting. Things can still work out. And, in a hard marriage, Patricius doesn't sound like a walk in the park to be married to. Well, that's what I have for you today. Any remaining thoughts, questions?
Tell me some more about the vision.
The vision. Yeah. I did kind of just skirt over that. The vision at Ostia. It takes place, of course, in a garden, like everything important does in these Augustine stories. I stood out leaning with Monica. I stood out leaning from a certain window where we could look into the garden within the house we had taken to Ostia on the Tiber, where, removed from the crowds, we were resting up after the hardships of a long journey in preparation for the voyage. We were alone, conversing together most tenderly, forgetting those things that are behind, stretching forth to those that are before. We inquired of one another in the present truth, which truth you are, as to what the eternal life of the saints would be like, which eye has not seen nor ear heard, nor has it entered into the heart of man. But we were straining out from the heart's mouth for those supernal streams flowing from your fountain, the fountain of life, which is with you, so that, being sprinkled with it, according to our capacity, we might in some measure think upon so great a subject. When our discourse has been brought to the point that the highest delight of the fleshly senses in the brightest corporeal light, when set against the sweetness of that life, seemed unworthy not merely of comparison with it, but even of a remembrance, then raising ourselves up with a more ardent love to the self-same, we proceeded step by step through all bodily things, up to that heaven whence shine the sun and the moon and the stars down upon the earth. We ascended higher yet by means of inward thought and discourse and admiration of your works, and we came up to our own minds. We transcended them so that we attain to the region of abundance that never fails, in which you feed Israel forever upon the food of truth, and where life is that wisdom by which all these things are made, both which have been and which are to be. And this wisdom itself is not made, but it is such as it is, as it was, and so will be forever. Nay, rather to have been and to be in the future do not belong to it, but only to be, for it is eternal. Skipping ahead a little bit, therefore we said, if for any man the tumult of the flesh fell silent, silent the images of earth, and of the waters and of the air, silent to heaven, silent for him, the very soul itself, and he should pass beyond himself by not thinking upon himself. Silent his dreams and all imagined appearances, and every tongue, every sign. If all things that come to be through change should become wholly silent to him. For if any man can hear that all these things save him, we did not make ourselves, but he who endures forever made us. I guess that's why I wasn't inclined to say much about it, is it's given in such experiential terms. It feels similar to the symposium where Plato and Socrates talk about ascending beyond thought. I mean, so it almost feels Platonic, like there's a ladder to it. There's language of the many heavens. Again, if I were a better biblical scholar, which is not my training, I could tell you what that means. But there are, there's like the sky, and then there's space, where you see like the sun and the moon, and then there's actual heaven, not really in space-time. But there's the third, there's language like that. You see some of that referenced here. But yeah, so, they're just sort of meditating on heaven in the future. And I guess that's part of what is supposed to give him peace in this situation is she's ready to go because that's what her mind's set on. There's nothing left earthly that she's preoccupied with. There's a similar story about Aquinas when he fell sick towards the end of his life, and he refused to work on his writings anymore because he said compared to what he had seen, all that he had written was like straw. So, but yeah, so there you have it. All right, I will see you all on Monday. I will upload some readings for Monday. And do we have somebody doing a book 9 student-led conversation, or is this one of our blanks? This might be one of our blanks, which is fine if it is. All right, very good. See you on Monday.
Nothing good weekend. I have to say, I think one of my favorite St. Lawrence's last words. Seriously great.
Huh?
The St. Lawrence last words.
Oh, it was to turn me over to the other side.
Yeah, the girl goes, flip me over, boys, I'm done on this side. He's also Cajun St. Comedians too.
That's funny. Mm-hmm.